So my name is Susan Suarez, and I am the president and CEO of the Holocaust Museum and Cohen Education Center here in Naples, Florida. So we're so pleased to see everyone, and we're very excited to have a discussion of this very interesting book. And the author, Leslie Berry, and her friend, Riselle Bain, will be discussing this. Riselle and Leslie both have personal or family connections to this story. So it'll be very interesting. So let me tell you a little bit about my friend, Leslie Berry. Leslie is an Amazon best-selling author and most recently a screenwriter, author, and executive producer. Her previous work includes executive positions with major entertainment companies, including Turner Broadcasting, Hasbro, Parker Brothers, Mattel, and Mindscape Video Games. Other areas of business include executive for the first e-shopping platform called eShop, and marketing for Lotus Development, the US Post Office, and AOL. She was an Alpha Sigma Tau at James Madison University and attended a graduate program at Harvard. She has spent the last 25 years with her husband, Doug Berry, in Tiburon, California, raising their 4 kids. Tiburon is in the San Francisco Bay Area, for those of you not familiar with the area. On the side, she's also devoted to genealogy, where she has uncovered many ideas for developing untold stories that help us appreciate the context of history, preserve lessons of the past, and honor memories through family storybooks. You can visit her website, newarkminutemen.com. Now, on a personal note, I first met Leslie and her family when I lived in California. Leslie and my husband had done some work together, and then the Berry family began vacationing in Florida. And they loved the Florida Gulf Coast so much that they bought a house in Naples, had a house here for several years. So we got to know them even better then, and their kids. 2 of their kids just graduated from college. So congratulations again, Leslie. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your book and all of its success.
Thank you.
In a moment, Leslie will also introduce Riselle. But first I wanted to also say a little bit of background. It's interesting as I first got to understand the topic of this book, to think back to the museum's exhibit that we hosted in the winter of 2019. Some of you may remember that exhibit. It was called Marching in America, Fascists, Nazis, and White Nationalists, Past and Present. And we covered the German-American Bund movement in that exhibit. And so it's going to be very interesting to go deeper into that portion of history, especially for me and some of the folks affiliated with our museum who may remember that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie.
Thank you very much, Susan. And it is very exciting to be reconnected with Naples. As Susan said, for several years there, we actually had a home, but a summer home. But my husband I think it was Hurricane Katrina came through there. And my husband got so nervous about owning property then on the Gulf Coast that we sold it. But I'm sure we'll be back. So I'm so really honored to be sharing this story, though, with this area, and also with I'll introduce Riselle in a second, but she has become a very dear friend. So first, Newark Minutemen is this lost part of American history, and it's directly tied to the rise of fascism during World War II, and also, therefore, a part of our early Holocaust history. And it's given me a lot of hope to have this opportunity to share this story, and and I want to say that I'm very happy today to be sharing it with Riselle Bain, who is her father was so actually what happened was I was doing another Zoom talk, and somebody reached out to me afterwards. Her name was, she said, "This is Francine Levine Schneiderman." And she said, "My father is one of the main characters in your book. He was a Minuteman." And so we got to know each other, and she said, "You should also get to know Riselle Bain because her father, Abby Bain, is also one of the main characters on your book." And so we have all become sort of Minutemen sisters, we call ourselves. And today, Riselle is has been gracious enough to share this interview with me. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce her right now, and she's going to take over.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And I know that there are some people who are here from my synagogue. I am the spiritual leader for Temple Israel of Highlands County, and I see some of their faces in their chats here. So I want to welcome them also. It is such an honor for me to be with you today as you share your story of your fascinating, inspirational book, Newark Minutemen, and help us understand the history of what was going on in our country in the 1930s that you uncovered and brought forth in your book. So my first question to you is to please tell us about the story of the Newark Minutemen.
Sure. So, so first of all, the reason I'm sort of proud or whatever that this has become this epic story. It's to me, it's this epic crime drama and this historical romance that's based on a true story, my own family story, that my mom actually helped me research for about 2 years straight. I talked to her almost every single day. And in fact, at the end of it, she said, "Does this mean we're not going to talk anymore?" Um, so, so it's this mix of action, which is this very violent period that was going on during the Great Depression of a divided America. And it's mixed with drama, where I've overlaid a romance on top of this era. And what I'm going to do right now, just to give you a context to the story, is I'm going to play the book trailer, which is about 2 minutes, and then I'll dive in a little deeper. And the rockets red glare, let us bursting in there. Hey, prove to the night that a flag was still there. Putting out a light, burning in their eyes, taking all its breath until there's nothing left inside. Spiders marching through, I hear they're coming soon, but I never have to fear, you're the angel in the room. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind, at the end we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. With fire in our hearts, we bid farewell to arms, but we are who we
Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind. At the end, we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. 37, are we ever coming home? Straight from heaven, I will never let you go. 37, are we ever coming home? Straight from heaven, I will never let you go. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind. At the end, we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love.
Hopefully that gives you sort of a context of what we'll talk about today. But so hopefully you saw that this is a love story. And in fact, it's a star-crossed love story that's probably doomed for failure, sort of a Romeo and Juliet or a Titanic, Jack and Rose type Titanic. It's set in New Jersey during the 1930s across this little known historical background of what was the rising German American Nazi Party in America during the Great Depression, right here on American soil. And it follows this Jewish boxer. His name is Yale, and he's part of a group of boxers called the Newark Minutemen. And they were organized back then by the Jewish mafia and our government to go up against this Bund, this rising party. So Yale goes undercover for this resistance group in New Jersey. And along the way, he falls in love with the daughter of the enemy. So it offers a sort of a dramatic perspective of one of the biggest untold stories leading up to World War II. And when I was writing it, I actually discovered this portrait of the American 1930s that revealed some of the American responses to fascism.
All right. Well, can you tell us a little more about the setting of your book?
Sure, sure. So the setting was Great Depression, 1930s, which happened to be this very fertile ground for alternatives to democracy. Because as you can imagine, well, there were actually three things going on at the start of this period, which was sort of started in 1933 when Hitler came into office or took power. So you've got the economic crisis here in America and then around the world that lasted a lot longer than people thought. You have these aggressive dictators around the world, and then you have this divided America. And our divided America was, they couldn't put food on the table. They were looking for alternatives to this hopelessness, and they were looking left and right. So they were looking, there was a whole communism that was sort of brewing in our country. FDR was sort of building sort of a socialist type approach where the government took the responsibility for many things. And then on the right, you had the fascism coming in. And in fact, there was this shadow party that filled up this great divide. And it was a Hitler satellite. It was called the German American Bund. And this story about Newark Minutemen is about this forgotten resistance group of fighters organized by the mob and our government to defend our country from this threat. Well, I know you probably have some knowledge about the period too.
Well, if we take a look at what was going on in the 1930s, just about the time when that big rally happened at Madison Square Garden. Before that, November 9th and 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht happened in Germany and parts of Austria. And this is considered to be the beginning of the Holocaust. And there were reports of 1,000 Jewish synagogues, more than 7,000 Jewish-owned businesses and homes were destroyed, and thousands of deaths, either by murder or suicide. Americans were shocked by Kristallnacht, but their outrage soon faded. And what was the reaction of the United States here as the news of the pogroms made their way here? Our government was slow to respond. So after all, we were an ocean away and we didn't have any fear of being invaded by Germany. So I understand that our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, waffled on condemning the pogroms. During a November 11th conference, he was asked if he had anything to say about the violence, and he said, "No, I think not. You'd better handle that through the State Department." So during those times, there was no plan to support the Jews that wanted to get out of Germany or to directly condemn Hitler for the pogroms, except by these unlikely heroes that we learn about in your book who took real physical stand against fascism and white supremacy. So tell me, where did this story come from? Because it's a historical novel, are there some of the characters that are actually real people? And are there others that are maybe fictional, but maybe they're based on real people?
Yes, so the how this story came together was it was interesting. So my mom is 95 now, going strong. She lives in Maryland.
God bless her.
Um, yeah, Baltimore. The person that was from Baltimore, we're right around the corner there, but for family wise. But so it was about 5 years ago at my mom's 90th birthday. My sisters and I said, okay, um, let's see if we can get 90 people to come to mom's birthday. And so we got all the old cousins and friends and everything to come. And by the way, my mom, she grew up in Newark, and she was the daughter of immigrants who had come here from escaping Russia in the early 1900s. And she had four older brothers, sort of that classic Jewish family in the in the third world ward, and then later on Hawthorne Avenue. Um, anyway, so my mom had told us stories all our lives. So she's 95. Obviously, she lived through the Depression, the crash earlier, the crash when she was young, um, wars, pandemics. She talks about the three big pandemics that went on. And we were kind of growing up. Here's mom with another story and what's true and what's not. What was really interesting was at this 90th birthday, we heard my mom and her cousins talking about all the old stories, and one in particular was her older brother, Harry. Now, Harry was a prize fighting boxer, and we all knew that because he had this Golden Glove trophy, and there was a newspaper article of in the newspaper. But what they started talking about was they said, Esther, do you remember when Harry used to come home at 3 o'clock in the morning and your mom would yell at him because he was all beat up? And she said, what are you doing out there beating up the Nazis again? And I kind of said, what do you mean beating up the Nazis? You all lived in New Jersey. You mean later on when he was in the war? And she's like, no, no, no. There was a group of boxers, all kinds of cultures, but in particular this group of Jewish boxers that was organized by the mob that would go out and, like I said, it was sort of this resistance about breaking up this party. And I sort of like became possessed about understanding the story because I'd never really heard it about before. And my cousin and I and sisters, we went out, we started taking my mom on road trips to interview cousins. And what was really great is when they shared memories, all these stories came out. And then also, I came across my couple of really valuable sort of crown jewels of what I discovered in my research was one was thousands of pages, literally, of FBI documents that had only been at the time recently unsealed, probably like 10 years ago, that when I started writing the book, which is relatively recent. And then I started discovering these archives. And one of the most interesting things I discovered was one of the ways I do my research for historical fiction is I create the characters, or I put the characters, the real life characters, on Ancestry. And then I go discover their background, who they were, and I get a real picture of them. And one of these brothers that I'd come across, they were called the Metcalf brothers. And these two brothers, one was a newspaper man in Chicago, and one worked for the FBI. And they were asked to go undercover for 6 months and then write a 14-day serial in the Chicago Daily Times about what they discovered. I was like, wow, that's interesting. And so I started looking for the articles, and I found the articles. What was even more interesting was on Ancestry, there was a footnote that John Metcalf's diaries that he kept to write these articles were in the Hoover Institute archives. Well, the Hoover Institute is right here, it's close by at Stanford. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to become a member and go over there and check it out, not knowing what I was going to find. And I went over, and it's one of these, if you've never been in an archives, you know, you go down underground and it's cold and you can't take in anything, and they make sure you don't have any pockets, you can steal stuff. But they do let you take pictures, but you're not supposed to bring in a phone or whatever. Anyway, I go into this archives. It ends up that there were 14 boxes from his notes of, this is firsthand source material of his writing about his experience going undercover. And I ended up tracking down his son, who's in his 80s now, living in the Hollywood area of California. And we discussed, you know, his whole experience, and he's like, use all the stuff. And so in my book, I actually use different experiences. There's one experience in particular, which was this initiation where John was initiated into the German American Bund as an SS, they called them the OD, sort of inner circle that protected this American Hitler. And I use in my book the whole initiation rites of that. But I would love to jump to a video so you can also get a sense of visually, because when I saw this video, this was when I was truly shocked. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to share this story. So this video it takes place President's Day. Well, actually, back then they called it Washington's birthday, 1939 in February, which was 6 months before Hitler invaded Poland. And if you go online, you can find a ton of footage, actual footage of this. This is just a little tiny clip because I just want to give you a flavor of it. But this is real. And the big punchline here is that this event takes place at Madison Square Garden in 1939, George Washington's birthday, in our Madison Square Garden. The American Hitler, we had this American Hitler, he filled the garden with 25,000 followers, and they called it Der Tag, which means the day where they were going to formalize the Nazi Party in America. So I want to show you that clip, and then I'll explain a little bit more about what was actually happening.
And again, this is after Kristallnacht. So
Yeah, yes, this is about 6 months after Kristallnacht, I guess. Okay.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protect ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite hand of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
So again, that just gives you a flavor of the rhetoric and the people, and but what was going on there was, so at the top, the man that you just saw, he was a German immigrant, who became a German American. His name was Fritz Kuhn, and he called himself, and everybody called him, the American Hitler. And what he did was he divided our country into three, and he was at the top of the hierarchy, and there was a very formalized structure that was mirrored the structure that Hitler had created in Germany. And there were thousands of cells across America with groups of followers. They wore Nazi uniforms that were smuggled in. They got guns from our NRA, because at the time our NRA gave away free guns, I guess. They were trained by our National Guard, because at the time you could join the National Guard and be trained. And they were trained, they had this, like I said, inner circle that was called the OD. There's a German term that stands for, and they were like the SS. And what Fritz Kuhn did was he organized his organization like a corporation, and there were 6 divisions. One was like a newspaper, one was the Center for Training, and so forth. And one of the most interesting sort of subsidiaries of his corporation was a real estate company. And what he was doing at the time, actually, Hitler was, what he used to say was that we're going to have German soil everywhere in the world. And so this was Fritz Kuhn's way of creating German soil in America. And what he did was he bought 25 pieces of property across the United States, and he turned them into Nazi youth camps. And these camps, this was one of the most, well, something, again, I had never heard of, and really sort of hit me, because what they were doing was taking our German American children, putting them in these camps in the summer. They wore uniforms, only spoke German, were educated in all of the Hitler, fascist, Nazi idealism. They learned Mein Kampf, all of the materials that I'm sure you all know of. And the whole sort of theme there was, you're obligated to America, but you're tied to Germany.
So tell me, with this going on, why couldn't we stop what was going on in the United States?
No, that it's a question we like. I was, it was so interesting to figure out. But if you look back, and in the past year or so, we can all maybe kind of relate to this. We were a very divided country. Many people did not want another war. They had either been part of the war or had close relatives, family, and friends that were part of World War One. I guess we didn't call it World War One; we called it the Great War back then. And the second reason was because of First Amendment rights. We couldn't do anything. Our government couldn't do anything, even though we had these troops marching down every one of our streets with their arms in the air. And but our hands were tied, again, because of First Amendment rights. And in fact, it was First Amendment rights, but it was also that our Supreme Court was so divided. We were literally divided down the middle. So when our First Amendment rights were even challenged, there was no legal sort of resolution. So the government's hands were tied. So what did they do? Well, it's 1930s. Who holds the power in our country? I'm sure you all know your history. In 1929, we had the Great Depression. Everybody lost their money, except who? The mafia, because of prohibition. They had all the cash, and therefore they had all the power. So our government went to the head of the Jewish mob, Meyer Lansky, at the time, and they said, Meyer, Lansky, we need your help. We'll pay you. And he said, no, you don't need to pay me. You just look the other way and we'll take care of it. So he goes to his buddy in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey, named Longy Zwillman. And Longy was the head of the mob in Newark. And Longy ran the whole sports gambling network, including, well, the biggest sport back then were the boxers. And so what Longy did was he had one of his main guys, Nat Arno, who was a retired prize-fighting boxer, train and pay men who would become what was called the Newark Minutemen. And so the idea was, on a minute's notice, they could call up one guy or 5 guys or 100 guys to go out and either stop demonstrations or stop meetings or go undercover. And my Uncle Harry and Riselle's father, and my guess is anybody else on here, I saw a couple things pop up, who had fathers that were boxers at the time, or even there were other Jewish boys of that age. because the mob, Longy's woman, would pay everybody $100 who'd go out if you went out and fought or whatever. And back then, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for Jewish boys, I guess. So, yeah.
So who were, again, a little more about these boys, these Minutemen.
Well, yeah, they were the they were the sons and brothers, think about it, of men who had probably escaped horrible violence in Europe. They were poor, not a lot of opportunities, couldn't really, very unlikely they would get into college at the time. This is, again, the 1930s, before the war. And I'm going to bring up actually a couple little, I'm going to share the screen one more time and bring up a couple visuals that give you an idea of who these boys really were. So they were Jewish boxers who helped the FBI and our government fight the Nazis. This is Longy's Willman. First of all, he was very good looking. He was young. They called him actually the Gatsby of gangsters. And if you ask anybody who grew up in Newark about Longy's Willman, if you asked my mom, you would say, what did you think of Longy's Willman? Their first reaction is, oh my God, we loved Longy's Willman. He was the Robin Hood of the neighborhood. He helped some of our relatives get out of escape from Europe, because again, Longy owned pretty much the mayor and the governor of New Jersey as well. And my mom tells stories too about on Halloween he would throw money to the kids. So this was Longy's Woman who ran the Jewish mob in Newark. Very powerful guy. And then you have the boxers who all wore the Jewish stars on their shorts. And this is actually one of the official membership cards of the original commander. Louis Scott is his name. Louis Scott. That's my Uncle Harry. That was the newspaper article. All of the boys had aliases. His was Dropper. Harry Levine was called Dropper Levine because they had aliases. As the story goes, is because they say if their mothers ever found out who they were, they wouldn't have let them fight. And this is Riselle's dad, and I'll let you talk about him a little bit.
Okay, well, my father actually was born in Vilnius, Russia, and came in to the United States as a baby. Family was very, very poor. And unfortunately, my father's father died when he was 36 years old and from an ear infection. And my father was the oldest of the 4 children. And so my father had to go to, they were Orthodox. So my father was going to shul at 6 years old to say Kaddish for his father. When my father was 12, his mother got him working papers at a roller bearing factory. And he would go there, and there was a bully. And the bully would say to him, "Hey, A.B., you're going to go to shul again today, A.B.?" He kept taunting him. And one day my dad had had enough of that, and he decided to fight it out with that bully. And lo and behold, he knocked the bully out. So from a kind of a schlub, from a nothing, his friends picked him up, took him to the Jewish Y, and my father began to train to become a boxer. He's 12 years old, he's 5 feet, he's 100 pounds. And he went from that point to becoming a middleweight, a wonderful middleweight, 6 feet tall, 163 pounds. And I'm proud to say that he did knock out the German middleweight champion, Hermann Hirsch, on January 2nd, 1929. So for my father, boxing became his sense of self-worth. It was a very difficult time, and he was involved with the mafia. They were his friends, his buddies, part of his brotherhood. These guys stayed close and loving all their lives. They seemed like they were tough, but together they would hug, they would kiss, they would cry together. But as Jack Dempsey always reminded my father, if you have to go into that ring and you have to be against your mother, you have to fight to kill. That was it. So
This is one of the camps your dad went to.
yeah, there he is. He's the good-looking one, I say. Right next to the lady who was the owner of the camp where they trained, and that was Madame Bay. So if you're looking at the screen, my father is to the right, very young there.
He's
Not,
the one with his shirt off, right?
yes, not so beat up and looking quite young and good looking at that time.
And this is just actually, this is a screenshot of from my website, newarkminutemen.com. I have a gallery, and as I've sort of released this story, people keep telling me, you know, my dad was a Minuteman, so I keep adding people to the Minutemen to the gallery. So certainly, if you have a dad or uncle or whoever, I would love to add them as well. So that's just the ones I've gotten so far. And this is just a story of one of the actual resistance events that went on. And the picture up front is the guy with the cigar. He's Nat Arno. He was sort of the captain of the group. So that's the flavor of who these guys were.
So, Leslie, if we were going to give a summary of everything that we've been offered today, and for your own background, can you either summarize the story or anything about your work in your research that surprised you about what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things about that my sort of takeaway is that to me this is a story about legacy, and it's about, like, if I were to say what is legacy, it's kind of what was given to me to bring forward and to keep safe. And it's also a story about complacency, or not being complacent, and making sure that if you feel or see something that's not right, you speak up, you do something about it. And you know, this is that's why these guys were heroes to me, because they spoke up when they weren't supposed to, and maybe they didn't follow the exact rules, but you know what, there was no law to help people back then, and they filled this void. um, so to me, that's sort of my takeaway of the
Do you
theme.
see any relevance with your story as to some of the things that are happening regarding anti-Semitism and white supremacy today?
Well, definitely, and I think, you know, over this, it's funny. Like I said, I started this story 5 years ago, or sort of capturing it, and certainly over the past year, it's the timing of it has been incredible. You know, unfortunately, this theme of hatred never goes away, but I think that you know, what we're seeing today is sort of a parallel in fears of what was happening back then. And I think the fear is similar, that back then there was, for the what we call the you know, the extremists, whether it's far right or far left, a fear of relevancy, and that for some reason, if you're not extreme on one end or the other, it could be both, that you're going to disappear, and that there's a fear of and what that does is, of course, causes this division, and then this whole idea of trust, and who, if everybody's so divided and extreme and arguing and making up things, or saying things I can't prove, who do I trust? Who do I trust? And where do I look? And so I think people are looking for different, to the right and to the left, for different answers, as they did back then, because they don't know who to trust.
Can I offer some words?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'd like to just offer a couple of quotes. I know I saw something, is there hope for us? Elie Wiesel, who is called the conscience of humanity. And he said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. And Rabbi Joachim Prince, who was originally a rabbi in Berlin and was expelled from Germany in 1937, he worked to organize the 1963 March on Washington with Martin Luther King. And he declared, the most urgent, most disgraceful, the most shameful, the most tragic problem is silence. America shall not become a nation of onlookers. America shall not remain silent. It can still give us hope today.
Yes, I think that's very relevant.
Yes.
So I think it's time for us to ask if there are any questions.
Yes, we've had several comments from folks, and there's a few people who have said that they think they had boxers in their family, and they're learning now that maybe there was some connection that they didn't realize. And we do have Ellen Wilder with us, whose grandfather was also a Minuteman. Ellen, if you'd like to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about what you know about that, that would be very interesting.
Sure. Hi. Sorry, I was a little late. I had a doctor's appointment, so I didn't mean to come on late. But my grandfather was probably my age about when I met him. So my perspective was kind of like this adoring grandchild that kind of knew this man was like a Tony Soprano type. Like, you just couldn't help but admire him, but there was an edge. And as I got a bit older, he would start confiding some things in me. But I think kind of like Leslie, where you hear stories and you're younger, you're not listening, maybe one ear, and but he always talked about breaking Nazi heads. Those were his exact words.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what is he talking about? And then he would say, when I got the call at night, I would leave your grandmother. Oh, she would get so mad at me. And, I didn't he said, the Bund was meeting and this and that. I was young. I didn't understand all the historical references. And then he was still alive, and an aunt of mine made a recording of him in the living room, talked about the whole family, every possible thing, and she lost the tape.
Oh.
And about 2 years ago, she's cleaning, Now, my grandfather died in the late 80s. My Aunt Roberta says, "You won't believe what I found." So in the mail comes a cassette tape. You can imagine we had the recorder, we pressed play and record, and right? And he talks about everything, but he starts giving specifics, and all the pieces started to come together. And he mentioned going to Schwaben Hall and places and people and beatings. And I was standing right next to Nat Arno, and he names Nat Arno. And every once in a while in the tape, he says, "You're recording me? You can't put this on tape." And one of my family members says, "It's so many years ago, Leo. It's okay. They're not coming for you." He says, "What, you know," and I'll have to get it for you, Leslie, like just to hear his voice when he says, "And when I say I fought the Nazis, I fought the Nazis. My hand," and he like just expresses it. And like, I listen and I just admired him all my life. And when I hear this, like you said, a hero in every sense of the word. And I guess it gives me some perspective why my grandparents eloped. My grandmother's parents weren't on board 100% at the beginning. He had that edge, but you know, I wouldn't have ever said I never heard anything that he did gangsterish. I think the whole reason he got involved was he delivered milk, and the milk truck was turned over in Newark by the Nazis, and Longy's Willman came to him and offered protection. And I think, although he never said it, this became a kind of exchange, which is what I'm understanding happened with some people. He wasn't a boxer. He totally admired Longy. And what you say in the book, the YMHA, Leslie, I think that had to have been the building, because he says in the interview, we all got together at a building, and my family's saying, "What building? What? Oh, is it a religious building?" He goes, "Oh, the building." And he was already older when we couldn't think, but it had to have been that YMHA where they all were. And you know, all the references you make, I have his fedora, just picturing the time and the place, and you know, I just loved him so much.
Ellen, one thing I want to emphasize what you said was, you know, there's sort of this pride about these boys, and sometimes, and I've had news people call me and say, you know, well, what did he kill people? And I got this. So Meyer Lansky's actually grandson reached out to me, and who actually, the Lansky movie is actually coming out in a couple of weeks. I'll give that a plug. It looks really good. But we had this whole conversation about, you know, our relatives, our uncles, our grandfathers, and I asked him. I said, after learning about everything your grandfather did, I said, were you proud? Were you ashamed? What? He goes, "Oh my God, no, I was so proud." He said, "This was a different time that we have a hard time even putting our shoes in today." But you know, obviously, we all, you know, the mafia did stuff we probably wouldn't endorse, but it was a different time, and the law was different, and there wasn't certain laws, and so this pride that comes along with these guys is, some people might judge it, but it's really, there's a heroic aspect to what they did.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about that building. That's probably the same building that my father was hauled off to, and where he learned how to be a prize fighter.
And I'm thinking they could have known each, you know, you just want to bring them back and ask so many more questions now.
Sure.
Where are you located, Cantor?
I'm in Florida. I live in Sarasota, and my congregation is in Sebring, Florida.
Very nice.
Where are you?
I am in Livingston, New
Oh,
Jersey.
okay. But I still have some family that's in Newark and Livingston. So, yeah,
Ellen, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
beautiful.
One of the other questions was it common were there many Jewish boxers? Was that a common hobby at the time?
Yes, actually, great question. So apparently during the 20s and the 30s, Jewish boxers were the largest ethnic group. They held more championships than any other ethnic group. Why? I guess because they came from tough breed. You know, it was a way for them to make money, and you can look online. It's dominant. I mean, there were other immigrant groups too, of course. You know, the Irish, the Italians, they all and blacks as well. But the Jews, the Jewish boxing boys for the 20s and 30s, they held more championship spots than any other ethnic group.
The golden age of Jewish boxers.
Yes.
And actually, my father fought for the light heavyweight championship of the world. He fought against another Jewish boxer. So it was A.B. Bain against Maxie Rosenblum.
Wow. So is there a movie in the works? There's questions about that too.
Yes, yes, there is, and we have a great production group. They're called Fullwell 73. They're based in the UK. Their fifth partner is James Corden um, from the Late Late Show and the one that does Carpool Karaoke, um, and they are so it's in development right now. With the pandemic, we've taken some steps forward, steps backwards. We had this great director whose movie got pushed out a year. So if we stay with him, we would have to wait a bit. So we're looking at some other options, but it's still moving along. And my 95-year-old mom is saying, "Come on, guys!" She pushes them along. So it'll be out.
That's exciting. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of the folks that uh, the Bund was recruiting were younger people, young boys, Hitler Youth camps, right? So when his organization did eventually fall apart, um, I believe we said in our exhibit it had to do with um, Kuhn's embezzlement and tax evasion, which led to his demise. Um, but did your research show anything about what happened to some of these younger boys who were indoctrinated in this
Yeah,
terrible?
it's interesting. I part of my research was a book. It's actually in the other room um, that I came across. That was it's called, if I can say the word, Wunderklaff's Salute, something like that. It was the guy's name. So, okay, so the background of that book was in the 70s, there was a social studies teacher who discovered the story of these Nazi camps and became fascinated with him. And so in 1970, he quit his job, went around the country and found and talked to the kids who had gone to these camps and what happened to them, to specifically answer your question. And it's an out of print book that I was lucky to get. And in fact, when my copy came, I opened it up, and these papers fell out, and some of them were actually letters from these kids. So the specific answer to your question is, so yes, the way this group ended was both as you said, Fritz Kuhn ended up going to jail for fraud and tax evasion because they couldn't get him directly because of First Amendment rights on some of the treasonous things he was doing. But then there were some other eye-opening things that happened. One was this, in fact, event at Madison Square Garden. The other was a movie called Confessions of a Nazi Spy. And so Americans started becoming aware, and German Americans, of which there were many great German Americans, but even the ones that were part of this party started becoming aware of what it really meant and what was really going on in Europe. So some of these German American Bund became leaders, went back to Germany, became leaders very high up in the organization, especially some of Fritz Kuhn's right hand men. Some of them, and many of them, went to fight for America, and so there was a split. One interesting thing I found in the same book, there was this question of whether the German American Bund was tied to Germany or whether it was this rogue group. After my research, and especially through this book, I concluded it was definitely tied. And the way I concluded that was because you follow the money. So there were very high, our leaders of our banking community. I'm talking Chase, I'm talking, some of the biggest banks. There was a whole money funneling thing that there was a special Reichsmark that was started being backed by the Jewish, what the Nazis were stealing from the Jews, their money, their property, their fillings, whatever else was stolen. And there was a special Reichsmark that used that gold and materials to back that. And what the deal was, sorry, I'm roundabout answering your question here, but what the deal was, if you were a German American and you bought from Chase or whoever else one of these special Reichsmarks, you would get a great deal. But the deal is that by 1939, you had to go back to Germany to get the money. And so there were a whole grouping of German American Bund members that did in 1939 buy these Reichsmarks and then go back. And that was with their families. So, convoluted answer to your question, the answer is, the party members as well as their children went in many, many different directions. But in general, I would say there was a huge eye-opening for Americans and German Americans to what was really going on, and many of those people became Americans and fought for America.
With regard to the camps, we talked about the indoctrination of the boys, but there were girls there also.
Yes.
What were they doing with the girls? What was the purpose of the girls?
Same thing as Hitler did in his Nazi camps. The boys were trained for military, girls were trained to be mothers and commit to having 5 children. And in fact, one of the big parts of my story, so my 2 main characters, Yale, is based on John Metcalf, who I spoke of before, who was the Chicago Times reporter. The girl he falls in love with, Krista, is based on a girl called Helen Rurus, who was, she was one of the campers. This came out later in FBI documents at the camp in Long Island called Yaphank. The town was Yaphank, Long Island. And what came out in the FBI documents was the girls at these camps were being raped in order to increase the Aryan population in America and put them on track to having their 5 committed children as a mitzvah to Hitler or whatever they called it. I don't know. So anyway, shocking stuff, and stuff that we've never heard of, and I was shocked enough to say, gotta share this story.
Yes, very shocking. There's so much more to this history that we could talk about. I think it's it is very interesting that we don't know very much about this story. I have seen some clips of that rally at Madison Square Garden that surface now and then. Folks forward it to me sometimes and ask if I had seen it. And for many people, it's the first time they'd ever seen that. We had no idea. And to me, it's shocking to see George Washington, larger than life, standing over this group as if this is representing some great American value. So I don't know if you think it was suppressed or, as with many other parts of history around World War II and the Holocaust, that people really didn't want to think about it for a while. They wanted to move on from the terrible things. But did you learn anything about that part of it?
It's certainly a question. I was like, why haven't I heard this? Why haven't my kids? Why don't they learn it in school? And I guess the two theories I've come away with is, well, maybe maybe World War II just upstaged this whole thing, and these boys that were Minutemen, obviously a lot of them went and fought for our nation, and maybe that became the bigger story. But I don't totally buy that, because it's part of American story, and it's the beginning of fascism in America, and it's also surrounded by this time. One of the reasons it really this organization was such a threat was because in the 20s there were several different fascist groups that had come over from after the Great War and all of that. And what happened in the 30s was radio. And what radio did was it unified, even though these groups were minorities, it unified the groups, and it allowed a very charismatic character, as well as some other charismatic people, to send out this unified message, much like the internet has done today. So when people say things like, oh, they're just minorities and they don't really have a lot of power, with media, there was it I mean, one of the numbers that comes out is 1 million followers, and not that 1 million people were members of the German American Bund, but there was a mailing list. There was the radio watchers, and they bring this number up to 1 million, which is a pretty significant number for a movement. So I don't totally buy the, World War II upstaged this event. It's part of American history, and it's the beginnings of fascism in America. The other reason I've sort of come away with was it was kind of a secret. I mean, this was our government. A Judge Perlman, who was a congressman, was the one that went to the mafia, asked them to help. The government looked the other way. Some of the government people were bankrolled by the mob, and the fact that the mob and the government were working together was kind of a secret. And in fact, some of the research I did was very hard to puzzle together because it was a secret. And just like, Ellen helped today, and I know, there's some other people here I saw come up that had Minutemen relatives. A lot of it was anecdotes where my cousin actually, who went to, I always get dinged for saying the school wrong. Let me make sure I try to say it right. Weequahic High School was the big Jewish high school back then in Newark, where my mom went, my cousins, my uncles, everybody went to. They my mom's part of this alumni group, and so my cousin actually helped me. We went on to the alumni group, and he said, "Hey, we're doing this research. Does anybody have, relatives that were Minutemen?" And we got all these stories back that we weaved into the story, and that's how we started some of the story. But it really had to be puzzled together. I mean, Susan, like you said, like you all have done this backdrop of what was going on at the time, but to put it together as to who actually fought that effort and how it came tumbling down is still not clear. It's not part of our, you know, history that we learn as Americans.
It's Week Wake. Week Wake is
Thank
how you
you.
pronounce it.
Thank you.
I'm
always
a
say it
graduate
wrong.
of Week Wake.
Did you go to, did you go to
Yes.
Week Wake?
Yes.
Okay, so my mom always she sings the Week Wake on the Hill song. Isn't there a famous school song?
Yes, there is.
Fun. All right, well, I think we are just about out of time. And Leslie and Riselle, thank you both so much for the discussion. And I encourage everyone to read the book. It is, there's a special going on. I think it's still available for a couple days at the special price
Yes.
for your independent bookseller. And we will all be looking forward to the film in the future. Maybe your mom can have a cameo in the film or something, you know?
Oh, anybody who comes to my events, just email me and we'll try to get everybody. And I'm really fighting to have it filmed in Newark, so we can have a big Newark party.
That's great. You know, I think this is a really hopeful story. We all need to stand up against the hate that continues. It's always going to continue, unfortunately. I think it's part of human nature. And so our positive voices need to drown out the voices of hate. And thank you to everyone on this call who I know is doing that every day.